countdown, we have Slender Man. According to Reddit user Inub Del Rey, they had an encounter with Slender Man. According to him, this happened back around 2014 to 2015. He was up one day scrolling through YouTube when he stumbled upon a weird video titled Slenderman Sighting 2012. Obviously, he figured it was fake, so he just watched it for fun. It's just a video of two people fooling around. In fact, he linked the video for us to watch. But at one point in the video, you can see what looks like Slender Man in the background. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is after watching this video, he heard a knock on his sliding glass door window that leads out to his backyard. He got spooked out and quickly looked out the window, but nothing was there. So he locked the door and closed the curtains. He tried to sit back down and watch something to distract him, but he couldn't concentrate. He felt like he was being watched. He went back over to the door and he claims he saw a tall man in a suit and tie staring back at him. This man had no face and looked exactly like Slender Man. He panicked and yelled for his mom, but the time she got there, the thing was gone. Had he really seen Slender Man? Or was it just a prank? In our 9th spot, we have the ghost passengers. And if you guys are liking this video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. This is a pretty famous urban legend, and there are multiple versions out there of it. But it's basically about someone picking up a passenger, and in the end, the passenger turns out to be dead. It's a ghost. Well, this has happened to a number of taxi drivers in Japan. After the 2011 tsunami that devastated Japan, drivers claimed to pick up a lot of ghosts of people that died in this disaster. At least 7 taxi drivers have reported this happening to them. They pick up the passenger, they're on their way to the destination, when the passenger says something weird. They look back at them, and they have already disappeared. In our 8th spot, we have the Phantom Bus of London. This one is pretty crazy. The Phantom Bus of London is a red double-decker bus with a number 7 on the side. Legend goes that this bus is driven by a phantom driver and is the cause of a number of accidents. Well, one night a car suddenly swerved and ran into a wall. Witnesses claimed that they saw a ghostly bus driving along the center of the road before it crashed into the car. I mean, if one person said they saw this, no one would believe them. But multiple witnesses saw the exact same thing. Sounds like the night bus from Harry Potter. Just saying. Just throwing it out there. In our 7th spot, we have the Black-Eyed Children. The Black-Eyed Children is an urban legend surrounding, you guessed it, children with eyes that are completely black. They tend to target adults that are alone and will ask for favors like a ride home or to come into their house and use their bathroom or make a phone call. Please, sir, can I use your loo? No, don't be fooled. Once you let them in, they will kill you. There are so many stories of people claiming that they have seen these demon children. In fact, there's a whole subreddit dedicated to encounter stories. One story was posted by Reddit user Hales Sooks. She claims that her mom encountered 2 black-eyed children. One night, her mom was arriving home from work late. After pulling into her driveway, she noticed a kid walking down the street. She clocked the kid, thought it was odd, but she was on the phone with her husband, so she was a little preoccupied. A couple minutes go by and she finally gets out of her car. That's when she hears a child say, "Excuse me." That child that was down the street was now directly behind her. She stared at the boy but couldn't see his face. His hood was covering his eyes. He asked the woman if she has seen another little boy. The mom knew something was wrong. Normally, she would be willing to help a poor child, but she was getting bad vibes. She kind of brushed off the kid and ran inside her house. Moments later, another little boy appeared on the driveway, and the two ran off together. She knows in her gut that those were the black-eyed children. See, this is why children terrify me. Just saying. In our 6th spot, we have the black-eyed children strike again. I'm telling you that these creepy demon children might be real. This story was posted just recently on Reddit by user Antonio. This story happened back in March of this year. He was home alone when all of a sudden he heard a knocking on his door. He looked through the window by his door and saw a small kid standing there. He opened the door and saw the kid had black eyes. The kid then asked to use the phone. He said his dad needed to call his mom. Antonio then asked where his dad was, and the child said that he's right beside him. Literally, there was no one else with him. Antonio finally closed the door, but 3 minutes later, he hears loud pounding on the door again. He looked outside, and now the demon is standing there, but this time he's bleeding from his eyebrow. The kid was pounding his head on the door, trying to get Antonio to let him in. I'm just glad that Antonio is okay. It could have gone so wrong for him. Also, if I see someone with black eyes, I am dipping so fast. Like, I'm not standing there talking to them and entertaining them. Like, no. In a blink, I'd be gone. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the hook hand. I'm sure you all have heard the famous urban legend about the man with a hook for a hand. He's a killer that escaped from an asylum and terrorizes kids that go on dates in the woods. Blah, blah, you get it. Well, Reddit user Goreback has a pretty terrifying story involving this hook-handed man. When he was a child, he had a friend that lived down the street. The friend always said that he would see an arm reaching around the corner in his basement, but it looked like the arm had a hook for a hand. He always believed that his friend was just trying to scare him. Well, his friend ended up moving away 6 years later, and a new family moved into the house. One of the people living there ended up becoming friends with his older brother. One day, he overheard them talking about how she saw this hook hand appear in the basement. I mean, 2 separate people who did not know each other saw the exact same thing several years apart. And the new girl that saw this hook hand was an adult. So like, what's going on in this house? Is Captain Hook living in their basement rent-free or what? Coming in at number 4, we have the Night Runner. So this is an urban legend that originated in a small town. In this town, apparently there once was a kid that was killed after running out in the street to get his rogue basketball. Legend goes that when you drive down the same street at night and flash your lights, you'll be able to see the boy run out to the street. Of course, this is just a legend, right? Well, this person thought so until he witnessed it for himself. So he was 17 at the time, and he was with some friends, and they were just fooling around trying to scare themselves. But when they drove down the road, they saw what they described as a shadow or a mist boy dart out on the street. Everyone saw it at the same time and screamed. He has never been back there since. In our 3rd spot, we have the Skinwalker. A Skinwalker is said to be this witch or demon that can turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. And Reddit user Tiger Burrito 12 claims to have seen one back in the day. Also, I love his name, Tiger Burrito. Classic. So when he was in 7th grade, he went out camping with his friends in northern Wisconsin. In the middle of the night, they heard a bunch of rustling. At one point, Tiger Burrito ran out with his hunting knife and flashlight, ready to scare off or catch whatever it was on the campground. To his surprise, it was just a coyote. It ran off frightened, but this Dumbo decided to chase after it. Don't ask me why. But then he followed it to an old shed. He took his flashlight and looked in, and that's when he saw a man wearing tribal furs, as he described. Tiger Burrito got so scared that he took off back to the campsite. So could it be that he encountered a real-life skinwalker? Moving on to number 2, we have Satan's Hollow. Satan's Hollow is an urban legend from a small town. Basically, it said that Satan worshippers go into the town's drain tunnels to contact and free a demon known as the Shadow Man. One day, Reddit user Mr. Redlegs and his friends decided to see if this was true. They went down to the tunnels and found them covered in spray paint. One of the things spray painted on the walls was an arrow pointing to the chamber, as they called it. The tunnel was also filled with satanic symbols. As they got deeper into the tunnel system, they started to feel uneasy. All of a sudden, they heard pounding coming from one of the walls ahead of them, like something was trying to get out. They got closer to the source of the noise, and it started getting really hot. That's when they fled. So maybe that was the Shadow Man trying to get out. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Call for Help. This urban legend is about someone who receives a call from a person who is dead. According to Officer Dalton Hosteliter, this happened to him. He kept receiving calls from a vacant household. This happened twice a night for a week. The person calling sounded like an old woman. All she would say is, please help, while coughing. Obviously, when they showed up, no one was at this house because no one lived there. Later, it was discovered that the house's last resident was a woman on her deathbed. She died from stage 2 lung cancer.
Number 10. Tricky smugglers. One of the biggest uses of the dark web is as a black market. There are sites that allow you to buy anything and everything, and unfortunately I do mean anything. But when it comes to buying illicit substances off the internet, some sellers have been extremely creative about their delivery methods. A few Reddit users discussing this told some stories of the most interesting and innocuous packaging they have seen. One user said that they constantly received junk brochures in the mail for cruises, zoos, all sorts of things, and thought nothing of it until they saw their roommate cutting into one to retrieve a bag of powder. Or there was allegedly a comic book seller whose entire back cover was a sheet of dissolvable hallucinogens. Another had seen a collectible Pez dispenser, still appearing to be factory sealed, arriving already filled with pills, not candy. I had a Buzz Lightyear one back in the day, but it never had anything like that in it. So be careful out there, folks. Number 9. We See You. This story comes from a user of the early internet, before Google, an ancient history for some of you I'm sure. This web-savvy individual often found themselves roaming around random dark web chat sites and found one with some cryptic comments, like people passing notes. Hidden in a JavaScript comment, he found various IP addresses, which is a device or router's unique address. He decided to browse through some of these for fun. We have different ideas of fun, I guess. And he found some of them belonged to servers with little to no security. Not planning on doing anything nefarious, just window shopping, he was flipping through one that seemed to have a lot of files of various sizes, mostly images of faxes, financial documents, and even some medical records. But after a while, a new file appeared, titled "Hello There." When he opened it, it was a simple text file with one line written, "We see you." About 15 seconds after opening it, the server went down. Something like that would make me not want to internet for a long while. Just don't go poking through people's stuff. It's that easy. Number 8. Your wish is my command. This story was told as a first-hand account from someone who has allegedly been in a psychiatric hospital since it happened. When he was younger, a rumor went around his school that there was a website on the dark web that could grant almost any wish you wanted, for a price. All you had to do was solve a cryptic puzzle. They don't go into detail about what it was or how they solved it, but it was hard enough that none of their friends did. When they got in, there was a simple form that you had to fill out for some personal information, and then a box where you entered your wish. Obviously, you should never give out your information to a sketchy website, but they didn't know any better. They started with a small wish as a test, a new Xbox. They hit enter, and the screen changed to a simple line of green text. Your wish is my command. Then the website kicked him back to the landing page. Nothing happened for a few days, so he figured it must be bogus, until he got home and found a package waiting for him at the front door. No name, no return markings. He quickly grabbed it and ran upstairs so that his parents wouldn't see, and sure enough, inside was a brand new Xbox. Overjoyed that it worked, he told his friend at school, and they didn't believe him, and so they said to wish for something bigger to prove that it was real. He went home and entered a new wish, for 2 of his old friends from his last school in another state to come visit. The screen said, "Your wish is my command." Later that night, he heard his parents talking about a car crash on the weekend, where a father died bringing home some presents for his kids, and some of the items were missing. A few days later, there was another package on his front step when he got home from school, but this time it was bigger and heavier. He dragged it inside and up the stairs, and when he opened it in his room, it filled with an ungodly stench. And when he got the nerve to look inside, he saw the faces of his 2 friends staring back at him, their heads neatly wrapped inside the box. In hysterics and not knowing what to do, he frantically called for his parents, and when they saw what was in the box, they assumed he had something to do with it, and they went to call the police. He frantically went back to the website and wished for his parents to keep quiet about it. Your wish is my command. Almost as soon as he hit enter, he heard the sound of glass breaking and 2 thuds. He went downstairs and saw his parents lying on the ground, dead from bullet wounds. He was arrested and stuck to his story, which landed him in a hospital for the rest of his life. Telling the story is a warning to anyone who would listen. Be careful what you wish for, I guess. Number 7. Send again. Another tale of an illegal purchase gone wrong. Someone who obviously remained anonymous online told the story of how they wanted to buy some party-enhancing substances from the dark web. They found someone on the black market who came highly recommended. What, is there a Yelp for these guys or something? He gave the seller the info for his family cottage, where he was going to secretly take his friends for a getaway party weekend. But when he got there was no package to be found. Figuring that the dealer tried to cheat him, he messaged saying that he never got the goods. Surprisingly, the seller responded, apologizing, and said that he would send more this week. So they rescheduled to have another party the next week. But when it rolled around, the same thing happened. So he messaged again, thinking this person just took the money and ran. But to his surprise, they said they would send twice as much to make up for it, all for free, which our party planner was skeptical skeptical to believe. When he got to his cottage the next weekend, there was no package waiting for him, but he did overhear his neighbors talking with someone over the fence. When he took a peek over, he saw his elderly neighbors giving a report to the police. They had been receiving box after box of illegal substances with no postmarkings, and they felt unsafe. Our party planner kicked himself. He wasn't getting cheated, he just entered the wrong address. So I guess there can be honor among criminals after all. Number 6. Willing victim. Now this one actually is a true story. In 2001, a German engineer named Bernd Brandis answered an ad on a dark web forum for people with a fetish for eating other people. Absolutely horrifying that these people exist, but he answered a post looking for a willing participant, wanting to be eaten. He met with Armin Mewvis, and they proceeded to videotape 4 hours of the two of them discussing what to do, and then they shared a meal made from Burns's reproductive organ. After which, Armin allowed him to go upstairs and take a bath, where he bled out until he was almost unconscious. Armin then stabbed him once, killing Bernd, and then he cooked and ate various parts of him over the next few days. He was arrested and jailed for his crimes, but since everyone involved was completely willing participants, he only received 8 years and 6 months in prison. He is now a vegetarian. Number 5. Red rooms. Red rooms are an urban legend that have been around as long as the dark web has. They are allegedly a place where disgusting people could watch horrible things happen to someone in the room and pay to decide what happens next. And obviously the room is red to denote what will happen in there. There are true horror stories of people browsing the dark web, stumbling into these places and seeing unforgettable things and never accessing the dark web again. There have been a few instances where people were caught and jailed for operating these things, and I won't give their names because that will simply give them more notoriety. But some have been caught after torturing and eventually killing up to 30 people, all at the request of people donating massive amounts of money. And if you ask me, those people are just as evil as the scum who would do this to another human being. Number 4. Light web. Okay, I need to talk about something light and fun after all that before we get to our top 3. While yes, a lot of the activity on the dark web is illegal and dark, as the name would suggest, there are sometimes wholesome moments from anonymous folk. On the same black market where you can find hitmen and illegal substances, some users have found more innocuous sellers. A German man who only sells soft pretzels, for instance. I guess they're so good he needs to sell them secretly. Or an auction for Bill Clinton's old saxophone, or my personal favorite, a Reddit user who didn't quite get what he asked for. The user bought a mind-blowing experience from someone on the black market. There was no explanation as to what it would be, but he purchased it anyway. When he got the package, he didn't know what to expect, but when he opened it, he didn't find a severed head or pills, but a used dustbuster. He commented that even though it wasn't what he expected, he wasn't disappointed, and busts dust with ease on the daily. Number 3. One-word story. Okay, back to the spooky stuff. This story was posted by a user named Anthony. He liked to play a game called One Word Story, where each player puts out one word at a time, and once someone says period, the sentence is over and read back aloud. He found a link to a site on the dark web for real players, promising an experience like no other. He played with a few large groups of people, but still the stories weren't good enough for him. Just before logging off for the night, he saw a private chat room in the horror section that only had one person in it. He clicked in, but it was locked with a password. Suddenly, the power in their apartment went out, only for a few seconds, and when the computer booted back up, it was still on the website. But now the chat room was open. He joined, and the other user began the game immediately with I, bold, because this can lead to some embarrassing sentences for the person to read. Anthony responded with C. They sent back you. He said through, and then your came back. And looking around his room, Anthony noticed his window letting in a breeze, so he said window. The user typed period. He read the sentence back aloud. I see you through your window. Haha, very funny. Clearly this person had played before and wanted to creep him out. They continued playing, swapping words back and forth until more sentences were made, but it seems the other user had a story planned the whole time. They traded words. You are not safe. This sent shivers down his spine. The next sentence became I am coming for you. There was a chat window next to the game screen, and Anthony told the other player to cut it out or he would leave the game. They replied with look out your window. As he did, he saw a figure dressed in black, standing near a lamppost. Then the lights went off in his apartment again. When they came back on, the figure was gone. Anthony looked back at the computer and one word was on the game screen. I. Tentatively, he responded am, and then one more appeared that made him cover his mouth to keep from screaming. It said here. I am here. He heard a loud pop, and suddenly there was a hole in his computer screen. In the center was a bullet, lodged into the monitor. It must have come from behind him. He ran upstairs and hid in his closet under his dirty clothes. He heard his front door open and footsteps walking through the house. He even saw their boots walking in the bedroom from under his closet door. He stayed there all night, even after they left, searching what seemed like the whole house. The next morning, he returned to his computer, and in the part of the screen that wasn't destroyed, the chat window was visible, with one word. Rematch? Number 2. Mariana's Web. Mariana's Web is allegedly the darkest, most secret, and hardest to access part of the dark web. It gets its name from the Marianas Trench, no, not my favorite band, the deepest place in the ocean. Supposedly, this is where you can find the darkest secrets humanity has ever had, from the Vatican's secret archives to the location of Atlantis to databases of the world's intelligence organizations. Some even believe that there is an all-powerful AI running it. Many people have come forward saying they have decrypted data packages from Mariana's Web, but it's all been debunked, and what was proven to be real information was already available elsewhere. It is supposedly only accessible through quantum computers, which are super cool, but I don't have time to get into that right now. Either way, getting there isn't easy, and it's not meant to be, if it even exists. I don't think that I'd want all of humanity's secrets out there for anyone with a VPN to access, so let's hope it is just an urban legend. Number 1. Scavenger hunt. This story starts with Trevor visiting the dark web to buy a mystery box from the black market, something he'd done before. Nothing illegal, just interesting, useless stuff usually showed up. But this time he bought from a different seller, who offered ones for 18th birthdays. A few days later he got it, and the box strangely had instructions. It said that he was about to be set out on a birthday treasure hunt, and had to burn all of the letters once they'd been read or solved. Fun game, he thought, and I personally do love a scavenger hunt. The note was signed by Pete, his childhood best friend whom he'd not seen in years. Maybe he was the one who sent the box, or the seller contacted him to make it more personalized. The first clue was a piece of paper that said Van Mace. After staring at it for a few minutes, he realized it was an anagram for man cave, what he and Pete had called Pete's basement growing up. He burned the note, sure that he had solved the clue, and drove to his old friend's house. Using the spare key he still had, he entered the back door leading into the basement and saw the next clue, an ace of spades and a picture, stabbed into the wall with a folding pocket knife. He pulled the knife from the wall and examined the picture. It was another place he and Pete would go when they were younger, a clearing in a forested area behind their old school, not too far away. He burned the picture and the ace of spades, keeping it in mind for later. When he arrived at the clearing, there was a shovel sticking out of the ground near a fresh mound of dirt. Ah, spade. Very clever. He started digging through the dirt, and not long later he hit something solid. He kneeled down and brushed away the dirt to look for his next clue, but instead he saw the face of Pete. He was buried in a shallow grave, and there was blood on his shirt where he had been stabbed repeatedly. In shock and devastated by the loss of his friend, he called the police and told them he'd found a body and to please hurry. As soon as he hung up, he realized that he had burned every note with the instructions, that his fingerprints would be all over Pete's basement and the key he used to get in, and that the knife that was undoubtedly used on Pete was in his pocket, and he was holding the shovel that was used to bury him. Somebody had set him up, and who would ever believe a story as crazy as this?
Starting off at number 10 now, we have The Woman in Black. Now, if you've ever watched any of my Urban Legends videos, you'll know that almost every country in the world seems to have a creepy story about a woman wandering along the side of the road and scaring drivers. Well, in 2014, it really happened. All along highways in Alabama, Georgia, Ohio, Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia, people started seeing a woman in black by the side of the road. She would always be wearing black willowy robes, dragging a small black bag and perhaps an umbrella if it was raining. Some people tried to talk to her, to offer her food, water, or money. She refused it all. Who was the woman in black? Well, eventually people found out. She was 54-year-old Elizabeth Poles. Police took her to an undisclosed location for her safety, where they fed her and helped her find shelter. She later told ABC News that she wished people would mind their own business and that her long journey was related to her faith and religion. Now, sadly, this interview only brought even more attention to Elizabeth, although she eventually dropped out of the public eye and perhaps continued her long journey. Moving on to number 9 now, we have the body snatchers. In the 1960s, there was a rumor going around that governments were removing parts from the bodies of dead children and shipping them to secret labs in the US. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? It sounds like something straight out of a horror movie, but it was totally true. When World War II ended with the US dropping the world's first atomic bombs, they wanted to determine the effects of nuclear radiation on humans around the world, specifically children who have been born since those bombs were dropped. It was called Project Sunshine. Over 1,500 bodies, many of them babies, were gathered from half a dozen countries from Europe to Australia in the 1950s for these studies. At times, the scientists would even ship single body parts taken from the babies without the parents even knowing. Coming in at number 8 now, we have Trick or Treat. For almost as long as Trick or Treat has been a thing, so too have the stories of nasty tricks of people putting dangerous things in the bags of little kids in order to cause them harm on Halloween. It sounds too horrific to be true, right? I mean, It's Halloween, it's supposed to be fun. In 2017 though, some parents' worst fears were confirmed when a mystery person allegedly dropped a small bag of crystal meth into the trick-or-treat bag of a toddler in Wisconsin. The Menominee Tribal Police Chief said the child's father was going through the candy and he found a really small clear plastic bag about the size of a quarter. When the substance inside was tested, it was proven that the powder was methamphetamine. As a response, the local school banned students from bringing any candy to school the next day while an investigation continued. Moving on to number 7 now, we have Colonel Buck's cursed tomb. You can find Colonel Buck's tomb in Maine. He was a famous military leader in the late 18th century, but is mostly known nowadays for his tomb. Colonel Buck was a Justice of the Peace. That title means he was a figure tasked with leading the local people and making sure justice and peace was always maintained. As part of this role, he is said to have ordered a witch be put to death by burning. The accused woman, in her dying breath, is said to have put a curse on his tomb that Buck had prepared for himself years before. When people looked at the tomb after, they saw a strange stain on it in the shape of a woman's leg. People said this was a sign of the curse and that the leg was actually the witch's. Now, according to legend, the stone has been replaced many times, but this stain keeps appearing. This urban legend is 100% true, except I think for the stone replacing bit. I'm not too sure about that bit, but yeah, let's go with 99% true. Next up at number 6 now, we have Le Loyon. For many years, people in Switzerland spoke of a strange figure who stalked the Morlaix forest wearing a camouflage jacket and a vintage gas mask. The locals began to call him Le Loyon, and he slipped into urban legend. Then, in 2013, someone snapped an actual picture of Le Loyon. He was real. Locals searched for him all over the forest. Someone even found a camouflage boiler suit folded in the forest along with a letter from him. The letter said that the man was annoyed that the media had exposed him because his walks in the forest were part of his happiness therapy. He concluded the letter by saying, "I have concluded that the media has had two effects: deprive a person of his harmless outlet and make others feel insecure." Ever since the letter was found, Le Loyon has never been seen again. Poor guy. Moving on to number 5 now, we have the Sunken City. All over the world, there are urban legends about towns and cities being submerged under the water. Perhaps the most famous example is, of course, Atlantis. Well, there is actually a real-life example of this in America, Lake Lanier. This is an artificial lake in Georgia that spreads out for 59 square miles. When the Army Corps began constructing the dam in 1950 to flood the area, people were already leaving. For those 5 years, the government bought up private land from farmers and townspeople so that they could be relocated elsewhere. The final count involved 250 families, 15 businesses, and 20 cemeteries, along with all the bodies buried there. The water ended up swallowing fields, bridges, gates, landmarks, a ferry business, roads, forests, and even a racetrack called Looper Speedway. These days, if you could walk along the bottom of the lake, which is 258 feet deep in some parts, you'd find a ghost town inhabited only by fish, swimming in the murky depths that humans once called home. Coming in at number 4 now, we have Catman of Greenock. In the Scottish town of Greenock, people talk for years about a strange man with no hair, covered in mud and dirt, who would be seen eating rats. If it sounds bizarre, that's because it was. The story spread across the whole area. People enjoyed it as nothing more than a creepy story, but then in 2007 things got very real. Someone uploaded this video of the Catman in real life chomping down on an actual rat. This was a shock to many people because stories of Catman have been around since the 1970s. However, since 2017, no sightings have been confirmed and Catman has slunk off again into local urban legend. Next up at number 3 now, we have E.T.'s burial spot. Now, from that title, you might think I'm about to tell you that E.T. wasn't just a movie, it was all real, and he died, and I know where he's buried. Now, if that was true, it would be the story of the century. It's not that, but this is really interesting as well. Legend says that somewhere in the New Mexico desert, Atari buried copies of one of the worst commercial failures in video game history, E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Why did that game fail? Well, it was clearly a cash grab deal with Steven Spielberg to make more money from one of the most successful movies at that time. They had just 5 weeks to make this game, and as such, it was rushed and sloppy and just rejected by the early gaming community. It also came came during the 1983 video game crash. That didn't help. So Atari have millions of unsold games and decided to bury a lot of them in the desert. Well, this urban legend is 100% true, of course. In 2013, a documentary team excavated the rumored dump site and found hundreds of thousands of Atari cartridges buried in the desert. Many of them were of E.T. the extraterrestrial. Next up at number 2 now, we have the medicine murder. For many years there have been urban legends going around about murderers breaking into people's houses by climbing through a bathroom cabinet. It's a creepy thought, a killer just squeezing into your bathroom in the middle of the night. It became such a popular urban legend that it inspired the 1992 horror film Candyman, which includes a scene where the main characters learn that a murderer might be entering apartments through the medicine cabinet. This actually used to be a major structural flaw in many American apartment blocks. Well, the nightmare became true in 1987. Back then, some housing blocks in Chicago had apartments that were joined with just a flimsy partition. An actual murder was committed by criminals who used this to climb through into someone else's apartment and commit a murder. The urban legend had become a movie, which has ended up becoming a reality. And finally, at number 1 now, we have Slave Master. Around the turn of the millennium, many people started receiving chain mail warning them of an instant messenger user called Slave Master, a serial killer who lured women to his house through public chat rooms. Sometimes he used names like Monkey Man 935 or Sweet Cali Guy Forever. Whatever his name was though, the email warned people that he had already killed 56 women. It seemed like an urban legend, and many of the details might have been embellished, but there is actually some dark truth to this story. In the 1990s, John Edwards Robinson was a serial killer from Kansas City who lured people to their deaths using instant messaging sites. His username was, of course, Slave Master. He remains on death row to this day.
Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have the Two Realms. To start this list off today, we've got to take it right back to the origins of Halloween, or All Hallows Eve as it used to be called. Legend has it that around this time of year, the veil between our world and the spirit world thins and the two worlds collide. This makes it easier for spirits to cross over to the realm of the living and vice versa. The origins of Halloween date back to the ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. This was an end-of-year celebration 2,000 years ago that marked the end of summer and harvest and marked the beginning of dark, cold winters, which was often a time marked with death. On the night of October 31st, they celebrated because they believed that the ghosts of the dead were returning to Earth. These ghosts would cause trouble, they'd damage crops, but it was also thought that druids, which are Celtic priests, would be able to make predictions for the future. Aside from these ancient origins, there are many other cultures that have similar types of celebrations, believing the same thing, that the veil between the realms has thinned. In our number 9 spot today, we have the haunted house prop. This urban legend was one that was super popular back in 2014 for a very spooky reason. Legend has it that in that year there was a 71-year-old man who went completely undiscovered for over 2 weeks as he lay in a haunted house in Illinois. This man had passed away, and although people could see him, they were mistaking him as a prop or dummy that was just a part of the haunted house, not as an actual corpse. Definitely a terrifying story and an absolute nightmare. I mean, could you possibly imagine? Luckily, this is all just the stuff of urban legends, and as far as I can tell, it isn't something that actually happened. Fingers crossed. In our number 8 spot today, we have laced candy. Every year we hear countless stories of parents warning of all of the many people out there who are deranged lunatics who are lacing Halloween candy with poison. I heard it as a kid, I'm sure my parents heard it when they were kids. It's not new to hear these stories, but what I didn't know is that many of these stories are largely just the stuff of urban legends. I am certainly not suggesting that we should just stop checking the candy after coming home from trick-or-treating. You truly do never know when it comes to strangers, but what I am saying is that these cautionary tales aren't necessarily based on things that actually happened. In 1964, there was a woman named Helen who gave out insect traps that clearly were marked as poisonous, steel wool pads, and dog biscuits. She handed them out to the trick-or-treaters, but apparently she just meant it as a joke because she felt many of the children trick-or-treating at her house were too old to participate. She did end up getting arrested for this, joke or not, but the story made national news. Joel Best, who's a professor of sociology and criminal justice at the University of Delaware, actually wrote a study on this exact concept in 1985 that examined cases like this, and he found that many of these instances were pretty much all jokes that had gone awry or just unverifiable rumors rather than people actively actively trying to be evil and harmful. Of course, that's not to say that it's never happened, it definitely has, but the most famous cases of these sort of Halloween poisonings didn't come from strangers handing out candy, and instead happened by family members towards other family members. Definitely still check the candy, it's important to do so, but also don't believe all of the rumors you hear. In our number 7 spot today we have the Headless Horseman. This is a classic Halloween tale that many of us are likely familiar with. This Halloween sort of figure originated in the 1820 short story, quote, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which was written by author Washington Irving. Little did Washington know that this story and character in particular would go on to have a major influence on pop culture, even still. The legend of the Headless Horseman begins in Sleepy Hollow, New York during the American Revolutionary War, and it was here that the horseman was actually a trooper who was killed in the Battle of the White Plains on October 28, 1776. The way he died is quite gruesome, but it's no surprise because, as his name would suggest, he lost his head. While his comrades carried his body off of the battlefield, no one was waiting around to collect the pieces of his head. Eventually, when they buried him in the cemetery, he later rose from the dead as a ghost, determined to find his missing head. Some versions of the story have him wielding a jack-o'-lantern as a sort of replacement head. Many versions of this story claim that he rose from the dead on, you guessed it, Halloween night, which is exactly why this tale has gone on to become a classic Halloween story. In our number 6 spot today we have the Spider Wig, not to be confused with Spider Pig. There are some spooky Halloween legends on this list today, but this one really is the stuff of nightmares. It's the classic tale of the Halloween trick-or-treater or party goer who is feeling a little more DIY inclined that year, feeling that homemade costume vibe. They head up to the attic to fetch one of grandma's old wigs. It's the perfect thing to complete the costume, just a few bobby pins and you're good to go. The wig is itchy, but it's old and dusty, and sometimes beauty is pain. Off to the Halloween party you go, but you start to find that the wig is really itchy. Like you can't possibly ignore it kind of itchy. And you're scratching and people are noticing, but it turns out that it's not the itching that they're looking at. Suddenly hundreds of arachnids start fleeing out of the wig and come down, crawling all over you. The party, it's spider madness. Listen, the Headless Horseman is spooky, but this one is just a little too real. In our number 5 spot today we have the Hitchhiker. This story starts off on an extremely stormy Halloween night. A man is driving down the highway just trying to make it to his destination safely when he sees a hitchhiker on the side of the road. Shocked that anyone would be hitchhiking in this bad of a storm, he figured that he must have been in a huge rush and pulled over to pick the man up. The hitchhiker got in the car and the pair took off. The hitchhiker was giving off some weird vibes and was mostly silent for the ride, so the driver began asking him simple questions to get a conversation started and to try and get to know the stranger that he had just picked up. The hitchhiker gave mostly one-word responses and didn't give away much information about where he had been or where he was going. As they drove, the radio was playing a news show because the hitchhiker had mentioned that he wasn't much of a music person. After several miles of travel, the news announcer on the radio said that there were reports of a patient escaping from a psychiatric institution. The hitchhiker quickly turned the channel, saying that he hated the news. Guy hates music, hates news, what are we supposed to listen to? The driver didn't reply to this, and the hitchhiker picked up on what the driver must have been thinking and said, "Don't worry, I'm not the killer." Okay. The driver continued to pry and asked what the hitchhiker did for a living. He revealed that he was a writer and was currently working on a book about a serial killer. The driver decided not to respond to this and just focus on the road and getting to where he could just drop this guy off. The driver turned the news channel back on only to hear a new announcement that they had stated they were getting more information on the escaped patient. They said that his name was Simon Hughes and that he is extremely dangerous and unpredictable. They said that the patient had escaped by pretending to be one of the hospital staff and that he had stolen a car and drove off. This prompted the hitchhiker to ask the driver what he said his name was. The driver responded with, "My name is Simon Hughes." Growing up hearing this story, I learned what a plot twist was. 8-year-old Olivia never saw that coming. Nope, blindsided. In our number 4 spot today we have the horrible predictions. A recurring Halloween myth is that there is this imminent threat of mass slayings. The story always has some sort of a psychic predicting these horrible things on some kind of a news program, but the details of what is going to happen are always annoyingly vague. It'll suggest that the threat is against something starting with the letter M or some other really vague clue that drives everyone into a panic, or at least a large number of the population. With the internet nowadays and Photoshop and memes, this is one legend that is only getting way easier to spread each year. In our number 3 spot today, we have the tattoo troubles. This is a classic Halloween warning that has been circulating around, and it has to do with those temporary tattoos that sometimes get handed out on Halloween. You may or may not have been warned before that these tattoos might be laced with something. Despite these terrifying tales, there has never been a recorded instance of this happening, and I mean, when we really think about it, that logistically makes sense. But just like checking the Halloween candy thing, if it's not true, that's great, but I'll still err on the side of caution, just in case. In our number 2 spot today, we have Knock Knock. This legend starts off with a man describing an old apartment he used to live in with an annoying upstairs neighbor. The neighbor was a weird looking guy who always kept to himself, but every night around midnight there would be a strange knocking noise coming from the upstairs apartment. It wasn't extremely loud, but because he was a light sleeper, it was really frustrating for him. Because of how often this happened, he started to realize that it was the same knocking pattern every time. It was like a record playing over and over with the same amount of time in between each knock. He ended up moving out and moving past this neighbor. Then several years later, the man is helping his new daughter that he has with her homework, and she is learning simple phrases in Morse code. She knocked one on the table and he instantly recognized this phrase as the same knocking pattern his neighbor had done all of those years before. He of course had to ask her what it meant, and she laughed and replied, "It's the easiest one. It's the one to call for help." In our number 1 spot today, we have Bloody Mary. This is a classic urban legend year-round, but if there's any time that Bloody Mary is really thriving, it's definitely around Halloween. I mean, remember the whole thinned veil thing? There's a couple tales behind who Bloody Mary is. Some say she's a revenge-hungry witch from Salem, others say she's Queen Mary I of England. Either way, whoever she is, it's best to just leave her alone, but people choose not to. Chanting Bloody Mary in front of a mirror in the dark is said to make her apparition appear, which people have said appears as a corpse, a ghost, or a witch. From here, a number of things may or may not happen. Participants may endure the apparition screaming at them, cursing at them, harming them, stealing their soul, drinking their blood, or scratching their eyes out. See, I told you, best to leave the gal alone, Halloween or otherwise.
Starting off number 10 now, we have Cropsey. Some of you guys may have heard me talk about this one before. It's the story of the boogeyman of Staten Island. He was rumored to be a homicidal maniac who escaped from a mental asylum. He would hunt for children and drag them back to the ruins of a hospital where he lived. Witnesses always said that he had a hook for a hand. These stories were meant to scare kids, perhaps even told to them by their own parents who wanted them to be more wary of strangers. Then, in 1972, the boogeyman became real. News broke of a real-life corpsey man called Andre Rand. He was a former janitor at the local school for mentally disabled children. Rand was arrested in connection with the disappearance of Jennifer Schweiger, a 12-year-old girl with Down syndrome. He lost his job over the case and moved into the now abandoned school that he used to work in. He was eventually convicted of murder, and police connected him to the disappearance of 4 other children. No bodies were ever recovered. Moving on now to number 9, guys, we have the Bunny Man. I talked about this legend in my West Virginia video, if you remember. The story goes that in 1904, a mental asylum closed down. While transferring inmates to a new facility, one of the buses crashed. Most of the people in it were killed or captured trying to escape, but one actually did escape, known as the Bunny Man. He would then roam the land, hunting rabbits and then leaving their half-eaten carcasses for the locals to find. Sometimes they will be hanging from a tree or a bridge. Although there are parts of the story that just don't add up, something strange happened in 1970. A couple driving their car at night had an axe thrown through their window by a man in a bunny suit. 2 weeks later, another man found an axe-wielding guy in a bunny suit chopping wood nearby who was gone by the time police arrived. Are these linked together somehow? Is there more truth to this than meets the eye? Moving on now to number 8, we have the body under the bed. Ever since hotels and motels have become a common part of society, people have swapped stories about guests who discovered that the mattress they were sleeping on was either above or even stuffed with the body of a murder victim. A grisly tale for sure, but one that was confined to the realms of myths and legend. Then, in 1999, a case in Colorado occurred involving a couple who slept on a mattress containing a body. The police kept the details of that close to their chest, but in 2010, a huge story broke when guests at a Memphis motel discovered they had been sleeping above the body of Sony Millbrook, a missing person at the time. Her boyfriend, Lakeith Moody, was convicted of the crime. Many people were horrified and vowed to give their hotel beds a closer inspection next time. Next up at number 7 now, guys, we have the Maine Robber. That's M-A-I-N-E. The state. For many years, visitors to Maine's North Pond have reported that something strange was going on there. Time after time, people reported that things were going missing. Not just one person, one time, many people, many times. Batteries and food would vanish from cabins, while flashlights just disappeared from camping tents. People thought either the earth itself was swallowing it all up, or there was a thief at work. It turns out they were right about that. In 2013, a game warden discovered Christopher Knight living alone in the woods. For 27 years, this man had been there watching hikers, canoeists and other visitors to the area. When taken in for questioning, Knight admitted that he was responsible for around 40 robberies a year. I mean, stealing batteries is one thing, but I feel like if you were being watched all those years and then you were proven right about it, that would be even creepier. At the number 6 spot now, we have the Falling Lawyer. Now, I've lived in Toronto for quite a few years now, and I've personally heard this story floating around the place, but I never thought it was actually true until now. They say that years ago there was a lawyer who loved to show off how strong his office windows were in his building that overlooked the city. Every time someone came to visit, he would take a long run up, jump, and hurl himself right into the window. Sure enough, the window would remain intact, although we'll never know if this actually impressed his visitors. Well, this lawyer was real, and his name was Gary Hoy. He was a senior partner at his firm with an office on the 24th floor. On July 9th, 1993, some law students came to visit. He took his usual leap at the window, but this time, after years of it being weakened, it smashed. Gary plummeted to his death, and the improbable story became somewhat of a local legend. Next up at number 5 now, we have the Puebla's secrets. For many years, longer than people can even remember, the people of Puebla in Mexico have talked about the tunnels. Secret tunnels that were built under their city by the Spanish conquistadors in the 1500s. It's been almost half a millennia since then, and the stories became legend. People looked for them, but they found nothing. The tunnels became a myth, something to scare the kids into believing there was a dark maze of caverns beneath them. In 2014, construction workers were in the middle of an urban remodeling project when they stumbled upon an old tunnel. Surely the legends weren't true. The Puebla History Center took over the site to investigate, and yes, it was the fabled tunnels people had spoken about. They determined the tunnels were built in 1531, right after the city was founded. Members of the Catholic Church supposedly used the tunnels to transport treasure and other property in and out of the city without people knowing about it. Part of the tunnels are now open to the public, giving you the chance to walk through the dark halls of an urban legend that came true. Coming in number 4 now, guys, we have the alligators. I definitely talked about this one in our New York Urban Legends video. Many years ago in New York, people would say that there were alligators in the sewers below the city. They said a young boy once flushed his pet alligator down the toilet. Years later, he reached into the sewer grate to retrieve a lost baseball. At that moment, a fully grown alligator leapt up from below and ripped his arm clean off. The same alligator he had flushed away. Many people dismissed the whole story. Alligators, New York, crazy. However, in 1959, Teddy May, the commissioner of New York during the time of these rumors, wrote about the alligators in his tell-all book. He said that he and his inspectors did find alligators in the New York sewers in 1935. They were up to 2 feet in size. It took 2 years for them to clear them all out, more than enough time for the facts to get blurred with fiction. Moving on to number 3 now, we have the Dog Boy. For many people in Arkansas, they know the stories of the Dog Boy. Kids swap tales of a werewolf-like man who roams around the town of Quitman. Some even say they've seen him. Many of them might not know that the story is somewhat based in real life. Gerald Bettis was born in Quitman in 1954. By the time he was a young boy, the neighbors were already calling him evil. They said he liked to capture stray animals and torture them in twisted experiments. As he got older, he turned on his parents, tormenting them until, at the age of 27, his dead father was found in his home. The newspapers said it was illness, but others said it was murder. Burris then kept his mother in the house until she was finally taken away and placed in protective custody. His mother testified against him and he was given life in prison, where he died a few years later. They say that his spirit still haunts that house and that he's often seen roaming the area as a ghost on all fours with shaggy hair like a dog. At the number 2 spot now, guys, we have Charlie No Face. Some of you may have heard me talk about this one in my Pennsylvanian video. Charlie No Face is the story of a boy called Charlie who once got electrocuted while climbing on an electric pole to try and see into a bird's nest. He was horrifically disfigured. His face had practically melted off. Eyes, nose, mouth, one of his ears and one of his arms all completely gone. It also turned his skin a sickly green. Somehow he survived and lived out his life in the small town, rarely showing his face to the other locals. People would share the story of Charlie No Face, but because nobody saw him, the story became nothing more than an urban legend. But it wasn't. The story was actually true, all except for the name. Charlie's real name was Raymond Robinson. He was friendly to people whenever they saw him, and he wasn't responsible for the many hauntings that became associated with the legend. And finally, number 1 now, we have Polybius. You may remember this from my video game Urban Legends video. Polybius was the name of an arcade game which kids in Portland got addicted to in 1981. Whenever they were forced off it, they felt nauseous, stressed, or even had seizures. Some people noticed the game was being serviced a lot more than usual. Instead of once a month, Polybius was being checked by men in black suits every single week. They would copy its hard drive, leave all of the money, and then be gone until the next week. People believed they were from the CIA, and that Polybius was all part of a mind control program that sent subliminal messages to its players. Well, a lot of this is debatable. There really was a kid who got sick during an arcade marathon contest in Portland in 1981. A few days after that, federal agents really did seize a load of arcade cabinets. They said it was all part of a major gambling bust. This is where people tend to differ in opinion. Some say that the story of Polybius was inspired by the events, others say the events are proof of the story.
In our number 10 spot, we have the Maine Hermit. So for a very long time, the people of North Pond, Maine noticed that things were going missing in their homes. Not jewelry or typical items that you would assume would go missing in a home invasion, but food such as peanut butter and apples. Since these items weren't of the highest value, the people just let it happen and didn't look too much into it. Until the invasions continuously happened close to, just 1,000 times, and that is not an exaggeration. Eventually, a man by the name of Christopher Knight was caught and was given the nickname of the Maine Hermit. Apparently, this man had been without human contact for 27 years as he was living alone in the woods. He would just steal what he needed to survive. Thankfully, he wasn't dangerous, but scary to think that he had been breaking into those people's homes so easily for years. I bet you they all installed security systems after he was caught. In our number 9 spot, we have the secret tunnels. It has been long thought to be an urban legend that beneath a lot of schools are secret, mysterious tunnels. Well, apparently, that is actually true. These tunnels are said to connect to places or even to lead to hell. Well, I'm not so sure the hell part is real, but the tunnels do exist in a lot of schools throughout the US. From people that have seen them, they have said that the tunnels are dark and cold and truly just the most spooky, probably where the idea of them leading to hell came from. They are mostly abandoned and any source of light that was once in them is completely gone. They were believed to have been used before as perhaps an easy sort of transportation between the buildings in the campus during the colder months, as they are typically in places that experience colder climates. In our number 8 spot, we have the University of Rochester swimming pool. Once upon a time, schools used to have swimming pools and it was a huge attraction. There would be swimming teams and competitions, and then over time they stopped being made with them and they became less popular. They became abandoned even in some schools like the University of Rochester, for example. They housed a swimming pool that eventually was just used for the storage of desks and chairs. The desks and chairs are piled so high that it truly is a creepy sight. Apparently there are also red footprints along the side of the pool, and some have speculated about them as they look like blood. Was this pool discontinued because of a killing? It's possible. Am I starting another urban legend? Possibly. In our number 7 spot, we have more anesthesia, please. There used to be a rumor that some people, when going into major surgery, would get anesthesia to numb the pain and put them to sleep, but it wouldn't fully work. It was thought to be untrue and just a rumor, until a few cases were revealed to have actually been real. Apparently, about 0.02% of people that have surgery fall asleep, but still feel the pain as they require more than most. Yikes, that's the most scary thing ever. Truly the worst nightmare you can imagine. They are asleep, but they still feel the pain of being ripped open. Apparently it has been reported that the people that this has happened to, unfortunately, have taken their own life not too long afterward due to the PTSD from the event. Wow, truly horrific. In our number 6 spot, we have the Bloody Mary. No, not the delicious drink that is, fun fact, my favorite beverage. Canadians call them Caesars, but I have heard that the rest of the world calls them Bloody Marys. Anyways, you know that fun children's game where you look into a mirror and say Bloody Mary 3 times and a Bloody Mary is supposed to appear? Such fun. Some children's games amaze me. Well, I'm not about to say that this game is real and to run to your mirrors right now to try it. I wish. Actually, no, I don't wish. But actually this game is based on a real person. You're supposed to see the ghost of Mary, the first Queen of England from the 1500s. Apparently she was quite violent, and that is where the name Bloody Mary came from, as she is said to haunt and kill the person who summons her in the mirror. I was too much of a scaredy cat to play this game as a kid. In our number 5 spot, we have the Body Farms. Yeah, the name of this one totally creeps me out, and the fact that this actually exists is horrifying. I mean, the main purpose of these body farms, where dead bodies are lined up for observing, is so that scientists can study them. Apparently such farms have dozens upon dozens of decomposing dead bodies. Apparently what we can learn from these bodies can help police solve unsolved cases. A lot of unidentified bodies are donated to these farms, as well as people donate them too. I mean, I kinda like the idea of helping with scientific research once I'm gone, but then again, I also like the idea of being put in a cozy bed with all my fave things for eternity too. So, a decision for later, Mel. In our number 4 spot, we have real Halloween props. Do you remember being a kid and walking up to a house to go trick-or-treating on Halloween and looking at the decorations and thinking, what if one of these decorations were real? And then 1 second later, the man sitting on the porch that you thought was a prop scarecrow turned out to be real by jumping in your face and growling at you? Yep, that happened to me. Another true story. Apparently there have actually been quite a few cases near Halloween where people have thought real life horrific things have been props. Like in the case of a woman who took her own life and hung from a tree, and for almost a week after Halloween, people hadn't noticed that she wasn't a prop. Well, my inner child is terrified thinking of the amount of times I may have actually stumbled across real things like this. Hopefully I never did. In our number 3 spot, we have the garbage legend. Did you ever get told to not hide in the garbage can because you might be accidentally thrown out with the trash? Well, that was not just some old story that parents told their kids to practice safe play. No, this story actually stemmed from truth. Apparently a boy was hiding in a duffel bag while playing hide and seek, and his mom accidentally threw it out with the trash, and the garbage man even put him in the back of the trunk, but thankfully the boy was discovered before the trash was crushed up. Apparently there are some other stories where people weren't as lucky. That is the most tragic thing. I remember hearing about a mom that turned the washer on when her young one was hiding in it, and that shook me up, but this is honestly just as horrible. In our number 2 spot, we have buried alive. Ever heard that phrase, being buried alive? Yeah, well, some thought it to be an urban legend, just a phrase. But the origin of where that phrase came from actually comes from truth. Apparently back in the day there was unfortunately quite a few cases where people were buried alive. Yep, so much so that it became common practice to put a bell in the grave so that the person could ring it if they were actually buried alive. Of course, we are better equipped with tools and are able to know these days, and that's not common anymore. But still quite chilling to think that it was once an issue and the phrase came from truth. In our number 1 spot we have Charlie No Face. There is an old urban legend told about a man named Charlie with no face. Depending on who told the story, Charlie No Face could be a monster, ghost, or someone who had an accident and no longer had a face, but apparently he would walk the streets of Big Beaver, Pennsylvania in the night. People would try to spot him and would drive the streets at night to see him. Well, apparently, the story is actually true. No, he wasn't a monster or a ghost, but a man named Raymond Robinson, and was a normal guy that unfortunately had an accident and it disfigured his face. From embarrassment, he would only walk the streets at night so people didn't see him. My bro actually had a horrible accident not too long ago, and not gonna lie, reading about the story had me very emotional. Thankfully, it wasn't as bad as this guy and he's alive and recovering, but it certainly gives you perspective as to what's important in life.